Hey, Miguel Adorati back here on the MMA Museum podcast. And this is episode 2 of a new segment that we have here called Classic Fights at the MMA Museum. And I'm joined by Todd Atkins, my partner in crime. We are going to look at classic fight from the last century, really. We're going to go back to March 1st of 1998 and review Rumina Sato versus Joel Gerson. Gerson, a Canadian. It was Todd who suggested we go with some SHOOTO and with Rumina Sato for this episode. Todd, what made you go in that direction?
Well, I mean, he was one of the first stars of Shooto, along with Hayato Sakurai, and well, I'd say, he's one of the first, but maybe there's some other people before him that were a little bit older. But as far as synonymous people with other audiences that crossed over into other audiences, like the American Internet Forum audience, Sato was very popular, and this fight was a little unique in that, you know, the way he lost was surprising because of his skills on the ground.
Right, and that's what makes this fight unique and historical, and why we're looking at it. This is 1998, so by now there is an internet. There was SHOOTO been going around since the 80s, and there are VHS tapes of older fights and older generation of fighters, Noboru Asahi, guys like that. Yeah, in SHOOTO. But yes, Rumina was probably the first big star that the people were like following and waiting to see, the result of his fight on the day it happened and stuff like that, not just catching videos afterward. Rumina Sato famously, one of Joe Silva's early favorite fighters of all time. Joe Silva, later on MMA matchmaker for the UFC. And Sato, to me, was the first pound for pound great. Frank Shamrock gets that title, and in the States, he probably deserves it. But overall, I think Rumina had him by a few months, and Rumina at the peak of his powers was something to behold. Heading into this fight, which was on March 1st, 1998, at Korakuen Hall in Japan, Tokyo, he meets Joel Gerson. Gerson making his debut, a Canadian judoka and jiu-jitsu artist. We had a surprise for Rumina in this one, but he was 11-0-1. Sato heading into this fight. The draw was with John Lewis, a famous competitor from back in the day as well, and he was heavily favored going into this fight. We're going to take a look at it now. Did you remember watching this one, or how'd you see this, Todd?
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw it. I think was on obviously it was on VHS. I didn't see it live or anything, but yeah, I didn't even know who Joel Gerson was. Obviously I knew who he was after, and
Sure.
it was the kind of fight that made you go try to look him up and find out something about him. I remember on the forums and stuff, I saw some threads about Joel Gerson because of this fight, where people were like, okay, who's this guy, so on and so forth.
Sure, and I think nowadays you can look back at him, a lifelong martial artist, Joel Gerson, still out there practicing jujitsu and teaching jujitsu at this point to the masses out there. And I think you look back at the early days of MMA, and you had Carlos Newton from Canada and Joel Gerson from Canada, are really the two pioneers from that sport. And then from there comes everybody else, Sam Stout and George St. Pierre and, Crow Loiseau. And, there was a time where the UFC was carried by Canada, by their athletes, where, they have a fraction of our population, but they could fill a card with Canadians. And they went back to Canada multiple occasions, George St. Pierre with his great run. And I'm not sure that we even get George St. Pierre if it wasn't for a guy like Joel Gerson practicing it, a decade or almost a decade beforehand and becoming adept. Um, as you pointed out, he's about to pull off, for the time, one of the biggest upsets in MMA history. Back in 1998, this was completely unexpected, completely unheard of. My hats off to Joel and all the Canadian audience. And as a Rumina fan, it hurts to show a loss of his, but this really transcends just a win or a loss. This is real history that Joel Gerson made here. SHOOTO, way ahead of the UFC. You're going to see gloves, rounds, weight classes, the whole kit in 1998, well before, and they've been doing that for years already, well before the UFC had instituted their full set of rules, and 3 full years before the unified rules were even implemented in the States. So, Todd, without further ado, let's go 3, 2, 1, and go. You see the early graphics there, March 1st, 98, Corkin Hall. Gerson comes out with a little kick. They're both in white. Gerson has the knee pads. Sato has the gold on his shorts. And you're going to see here Gerson, known for his judo as well. A great judo throw he pulls off there. Sato already, you could see, very tense, very tricky with his groundwork. Gerson didn't want any part of staying in his guard, and he got back up. You can see Gerson not, completely a skilled stand-up fighter. He's got his stance, and he's throwing little jabs and things, but you could, and he's not totally comfortable. You could see that Sato's probably a more polished stand-up guy. No shoes at this point also. Very notable. This is kind of what MMA fighters look like nowadays, and and they didn't match that in the UFC. What are you looking at here, Todd?
Well, I mean, looking back on this, especially watching fights today, it's amazing how well-rounded these Shooto guys were back then. And I think that's why a lot of them had so much success in this kind of era is
Sure.
they were already very well-rounded fighters. They had been putting everything together already and doing all the various techniques of grappling, stand-up fighting, kicking, punching, everything, wrestling.
Yeah.
There was nothing they couldn't do.
And in Sato, I think you even go further. You can see him there go for a flying armbar, one of his signature moves. With Sato, I think you even add the gamut of he had nutrition and conditioning, and his body looks like a fighter. That we mentioned Joe Silva. Joe Silva always talked about the eye test looking like a fighter and not looking, like you just Tank Abbott who just got off the couch or whatever. Sato fills all those boxes here, and you can see he's confident. He's coming forward. This is Shooto's big star. This is the main event of the show. Actually, Carlos Newton was in the co-main event, but Gerson, even though you can see Gerson is not intimidated, and he may, be unsure of what's coming his way because Sato's multifaceted attack, but he's not intimidated, and he's putting forward, what he knows to do, shooting for takedowns when he gets in trouble and trying to get the fight to the ground his way. He got the nice takedown earlier. Right now, the Japanese judges are probably giving this round to Sato, so we'll see how it goes. Joe's going to have to maybe pick it up and do a little more, but he's not lost. You know what I mean? You could already tell that you're looking at a skilled martial artist. He's answering with those tie kicks, Again, he's trying to take down Sato, throwing an uppercut. Another nice judo takedown, trip. And very classy. He sits to let Sato back up. And Sato, really, no mercy, starts to unleash some strikes on him. So he tries for
another great throw there.
And that one was a little more sloppy, but definitely he controlled and took it. And that's the big surprise. And that is going to be Sato fights off this armbar for all he's worth, but he is not able to get out of it. You could see Gerson making the adjustments, and he got him in a really bad position. He took the position he got from the takedown, instantly went into the armbar, and that's not a move that you just pull out of the air. That's a man that's been practicing jiu-jitsu at a high level, and this is March of 98. You could see the disappointment in Sato. You could see the absolute elation on Gerson's corner. He's trying to help Sato up, trying to do the competitive thing, gives him a hug. You could tell Sato not taking the loss well in terms of just completely unexpected. That armbar came from nowhere. And that was a historic fight. That was a fight that changed the landscape because one of the guys that was considered unbeaten by Shooto themselves, he was their poster boy, took a defeat, and he didn't get knocked out. Later on, he might, many people remember his famous loss to Andre Pederneiras, where he was on his back and Pederneiras came around with a kick and kicked him in the face and knocked him out. If Gerson knocked him out, you could say that, but Gerson submitted him, got the submission artist in a submission, And for that, the respect that he deserves to have piled on him is just, endless. And it hasn't been there really. Some people acknowledge it. I've actually heard Joe Rogan talking about Gerson on his podcast at times, and things like that. So guys like Joe that watch the sport in the early going remember it, but what you have just seen is a historical fight. That's Shooto in Japan, Todd. You lived over in Japan. Did you ever go to a Shooto show?
Oh, tons of them. Yeah, I tried to go to all of them that I could. Any that were in Tokyo, and yeah, which is where most of them were. They were Korakuen Hall for the majority of them, and I tried to go to just about all of those.
Yeah, this one was in Korakuen Hall as well.
Mhm.
What do you remember about Korakuen Hall? How many people fit in that building?
Well, I really don't know how many. It's not a lot, maybe a couple
Yeah,
thousand at the most.
I think
Maybe
they
less.
I think
Yeah.
the building actually has a couple of configurations where you can get up to 2,000 or 3,000 into a room, but then they'll trim the room down and put some seating out, and you can have a cozy show with 500 or 600 people as well. And that's really where the sport was, even in Japan.
Hmm.
This is, pre-Pride. Shooto was there, uh, putting forth what real fighting looked like, and there's no doubt that what you saw, especially for 1998, right there, was a very, very advanced fight. And for them to even have found Joel Gerson as a feather in Shooto's cap, where'd this guy come from and where'd he go? He took a loss in his next fight and then didn't fight again. Maybe we'll have him on for an interview at one point, find out more and dig in a little deeper there. But like I said, he's a guy I think is responsible for teaching a lot of people a lot of jiu-jitsu up in the Canada area over the last, couple of decades. So a truly historical fight, Todd. And with that, we'll sign off.
Well, before we do, one thing that I do want to point out, people, if there's people watching our audience, I would think is pretty familiar with Shooto and things like that. But for people who maybe come across this video, people are mostly watching UFC these days. This venue, Korakuen Hall, was a venue that everybody dreamed of fighting in, not just Japanese or everybody. Anybody who fought in any show, even the UFC was around then. All the guys wanted to fight in Korakuen Hall because this is kind of a hallowed ground. So it's a very unique place. A lot of guys signed the wall. A lot of guys that fought there signed the wall. There's all kinds of signatures everywhere, and a lot of legendary people have competed in there, both pro wrestling and fighting. And
for sure. The Pancrase ran a lot of events there, and as you mentioned, pro wrestling, it has its own feature hallowed spot among the pro wrestlers as well. And definitely this fight for Shooto's records has to go down as one of the most historic fights of this time, because their poster boy Rumina Sato just took a loss. And hats off to Joel Gerson. And we'll leave it at that. We'll be back with another segment here in the next few days. So thank you guys.